Hi, I'm Wendy from ShinyHappyWorld.com, and today is the moment you've all been waiting for. You're going to use the machine. I've got a sheet. It's much easier to practice with paper than it is with fabric, so this is a good way to start out. I've got a sheet that I made up with some straight lines and some straight lines with corners that you can practice following. You can print this out as many times as you need to. It's going to be in the blog post that's attached to this video. The first thing you want to do is take all the thread out of the machine so that you're just sewing with an empty needle. And this is going to ruin this needle. So when you're done, you're going to need to change it and put in a new one. So put your paper in what you think is going to be lined up. Lower the presser foot. There's always a lever somewhere on the back of the machine that raises and lowers that presser foot. It won't sew properly unless it's lowered. Lower the presser foot so that the line that you're sewing on is right through the middle of that presser foot. And then just gently push down on the pedal. And sew. And I'm not pushing that through. I'll show you in a minute after we take this out how it's working, but you're not pushing the fabric or the paper through. All you're doing is gently steering it. And just follow that line. Raise the presser foot and pull it out. And I followed that line pretty closely. If you look down here, underneath the presser foot, these are rough. These are called feed dogs, and what they're doing is grabbing the fabric. I'm going to hand crank it so you can see it moving slowly. They go down when the needle goes down, and then they come up and they're coming forward. They grab the fabric, that roughness grabs the fabric, it lifts up, it presses against that presser foot, and see how they're moving backwards? It pulls the fabric back for a stitch. So those feed dogs are what are pulling the fabric through. You do not need to push it through. All you've got to do is steer. So we're going to do one more straight line. Put it in there. Lower the presser foot. If you forget to lower the presser foot, you're going to end up with a snarl of thread on the back. And it will happen. Everybody forgets to lower the presser foot sometimes. But it also won't pull your fabric forward, so you'll know right away. So I've got the presser foot down. And just follow that line. Now I'm going to show you turning a corner. Start here in this corner. I lowered the presser foot. I'm going to follow this forward, just steering it. When I get to the end, I'm going to go really slow. And for this last one, I'm going to use the hand crank at the side, pull that needle down. Stop when your needle is down in the paper or in the fabric. Raise that presser foot, and now the needle is going to hold it in place. You turn it so that it's facing toward you again. Lower that presser foot, and that way you can make a perfect 90-degree turn. Practice that a few times. When you get to the end, turn it by hand so that you can stop with it down. Raise the presser foot, spin it. Oh, look, I didn't go all the way to the end. So I'm going to turn it back, lower my presser foot back, and do one more crank. So you want to notice those things. Lift up, and now it's perfect. See, it's right on that corner, and that's okay if it takes you a couple of tries. Go forward, crank it down. Lift up the presser foot, spin it around, lower down the presser foot, and we're going to do one more pass. So we worked all the way around the square. I'm not going to show you the zigzags, that's just there for you to practice. But I want to show you one other thing. Normally when you're sewing, the sewing lines are not going to be marked on your fabric. You're going to be using these gauge lines that are on the throat plate. Here, see how that has 3/8, 1/2, 5/8, 3/4, and 1 inch? That is how far away that line is from where the needle is going in. And that is normally how you would measure where the line is going to go. Most of the time what you're going to have is a 1/4 inch seam allowance or a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. A seam allowance is how much extra fabric there is past your thread line. So for most craft things, it's a 1/4 of an inch. and 1/4 of an inch just happens to be right lined up with the edge of my presser foot here, which makes it a really easy line to follow. So I put my paper in there, lower my presser foot so that the edge of the paper is lined up with the edge of my presser foot, and I'm going to sew. I'm keeping that lined up right there at the edge. And now I've got a perfect, if I measured that, that would be 1/4 of an inch seam allowance between my seam line and the edge of the thread all the way up there. The other measurement that you're going to use a lot is 5/8 of an inch. That's for most time when you're sewing clothes. This is the 5/8 of an inch line right here. So now I've got a lot more paper sticking out from the edge, but I can still see that line. And now I'm going to sew that. Right up to the edge. I'm going to take it out. And now I've got a perfect 5/8 of an inch seam all the way along without having to mark on it. If you need to draw your stitch lines on your fabric to start with, that is absolutely fine. But you should definitely practice learning to use those markings as your measuring guides, because that's going to be a lot faster. You won't want to always mark the stitch lines on there. Now I'm going to show you one time that I do mark, and that's when you're turning a corner. It's hard to know where to stop because there's no marking that's showing you where the edge of that fabric is. So I'm going to sew this together with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I want to turn the corner when I'm 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, so I'm making that turn. So I've got this ruler here. I've measured, that's 1/4 of an inch. I'm putting my needle in. You can mark it with a pen if you want, but I like to use a pen. So now I know where to stop. So I'm going to come down here. There's going to be 1/4 of an inch all along here, and I'm going to stop 1/4 of an inch from the bottom so that I can turn and then have a perfectly straight line with 1/4 of an inch seam right there. So I put a new needle in and I threaded the machine, and now I'm going to sew this. I used a back stitch at the beginning, push the button in and back stitch a couple of stitches. That's going to act like a knot to hold your stitches in place. You can see I've got my fabric lined up with the edge of the presser foot, so I get that 1/4 of an inch. When I get down to the end, I'm going to slow way down, and for that last stitch I'm going to use the hand crank instead of the foot pedal to push that down so that needle went in right where the pin is. So I know it's 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I'm going to lift up the presser foot, turn it, and look, it's exactly lined up. So all the way down here. So I back stitched at the beginning, stitched all the way along, and then I have 1/4 of an inch away from either side. I've got a nice sharp corner, and then I've gone down here. I would normally backstitch at the end. I was just showing you here. You want to always backstitch at the beginning and the end so that it locks your stitches in place. So that's it. Practice sewing first on the paper until you get a feel for how the machine works, how hard you have to push on the pedal to get a certain speed out of the needle. Practice turning that hand crank. Remember, you always want to turn it towards you for that final little bit to slow down at the corner. Print out as many of those paper pieces as you need to and practice as much as you need to until you get a feel for the machine and how it's going to run for you. Then put in a new needle, put in some thread, and practice on some fabric. I'm Wendy from ShinyHappyWorld.com, and next time I'm going to teach you how to turn a hem. Thanks!